I'm Morra Aarons-Mele, and this is The Anxious Achiever, the show that looks at the intersection of mental health and work, and how we can all do both better.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, host of Everyday Better, an award-winning podcast dedicated to personal development. Join me every week for captivating stories and research to find more fulfillment in your work and personal life. Listen to Everyday Better on the LinkedIn Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Struggling to keep up with customers? With Agentforce and Salesforce Data Cloud, deploy AI agents that know your customers and act on their own. That's because Data Cloud brings all your data to Agentforce, no matter where it lives. Get started at salesforce.com/data.
Luvvie Ajayi Jones is a 4-time New York Times bestselling author, prolific public speaker, and host of the Professional Troublemaker podcast. She really was one of the early people to build a profile online that her audience felt so passionate about, believed in so much. Luvvie and I have known each other for years. We both opened for the actress Kerry Washington at the Blog Her conference, and that was an amazing experience. I've always looked up to Luvvie as someone who seemed like she had it all figured out, in this thought leadership game, really thriving, succeeding, viral, TED Talk, the whole nine. Honestly, she made me jealous. Right now, her company is in a rebuilding phase. She had a really hard time of it, and she gets raw with that. Open, even going through some decisions she probably wouldn't make again. The scary, stressful, mentally draining times. And it's really cool that Luvvie is so open about this journey because a lot of us, especially those of us entrepreneurs, we go through this. We do things we regret. We expand too quickly. We have management problems. Anyone who's had a career setback, who has realized that maybe they can't rely on their coworkers or their team members they thought they could, or if you've just realized something in your career isn't working and it's time to make a pivot, even if that means going back to square one, this conversation is for you. Because I've watched your career, because we've been part of a couple communities over the decades.
Yeah.
And I knew, watching you from afar, I'm like, she has figured everything out. She's so famous. She's on all these stages. She's this. You had been a source of insecurity for me.
Of anxiety.
Of anxiety for me. And so to hear that you felt struggles and had real struggles as an entrepreneur too, was wildly affirming. I'm sure I'm not the first person who's told you that.
Yes. I think one of the biggest pieces of feedback I've received from this season of Professional Troublemaker is that people literally feel seen.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people see my career, they see my platforms, they see how I always show up publicly in ways of excellence, and they do assume I have it all together. I do not have it all together. And it was really important for me to tell the story of how 2023 fought me, okay? 2023 was my toughest year as a business owner, as a person who's trying to figure out this purpose-driven life. And it was important for me to tell the truth of it all because I think we often leave the truth out the room. And I think as a result of it, so many of us, we think our struggles are singular.
Mm-hmm.
We think we are weak. We might think we're not competent. We might think whatever we want to think to beat ourselves up when things don't go our way. And it was important for me to tell the truth because, again, people see me as this bold person who's confident, who looks like she has it all together. And I was like, let me pull the curtains and make you all understand that I don't have it all together. And if your year was anything like mine, we all have something to learn, but also we were all in a collective struggle.
That's right. So why don't you set the stage for anyone listening who doesn't know you as well as I do from the outside even. What is your business? Tell us about what you do and also sort of the buckets of revenue streams that you were looking at as we were coming into 2023.
I'm the CEO and Chief Visionary Officer of All Love Media. And we are a company that creates compelling content that makes people think critically, feel joy, and take action to leave this world better than we found it. So whether it is through books, podcasts, social, however way, the work that my company creates is with the idea that it will allow people to take transformative action, right? So that's my why. That's my purpose. I am the person who gives people courage to take transformative action in their lives. And that action becomes a domino effect in the world. So personally and professionally, I will give you some of the tools that you need to make that happen. Speaking has been my biggest revenue stream for over 10 years. I am a professional speaker. My TED Talk went viral in 2017 and now has 9 million views. So I get 500 inquiries for speaking every year. And I only do 20. So that's one big piece of revenue stream. Another is in my books. I have written 4 New York Times bestselling books. Professional Troublemaker is my banner book. That came out in 2021. And then other pieces of smaller revenue are things like I'll do brand partnerships because, I've been in this space. I've been blogging since 2003. So I was one of the OGs of blogging, 21 years, which is crazy. More than half my life, by the way. I was in college when I started blogging. So that's literally more than half my life, which is wild. And then another piece of revenue. So sometimes I do affiliate deals to amplify small businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And then other things, I'm a coach and I'm a consultant. So I help people write and publish successful books through my book academy. So we have all these different pots of revenue. What happened in 2023 was that all the pots stopped at once because my team was being ineffective and running in chaos. And I had goals I need to meet. And it was like a comedy of errors. It was like the perfect storm of terrible things. And to the point where my company ended up almost bankrupt, like 3 months away from bankruptcy. So that's what I've been talking about in my podcast is really walking people through the story, not just of my company, but how 2023 unfolded. I give details of how it happened because whenever we talk about what's going on with our lives, with our companies, we'll leave out some things. We'll be like, no, I literally took episodes to be like, let me tell you about the crumbling.
So to set this up, you had a 7-figure business going into 2023, and your goal was let's diversify. Let's make this not all about me.
Yes.
And you hired a lot. Set us up for your intention as we go into 2023.
So I actually started hiring a bigger team well, not even bigger. It's still a tiny team because it was 6 people. But my goal was that my company's revenue was too dependent on my thought leadership, my presence. Meaning our 2 biggest revenue streams, speaking and books, literally depended on my creativity, my thoughts, and me putting pen on paper or stepping on a stage. And I have known for a long time that is a risky business model because it's too much pressure. A business is built on the back of one person literally showing up. What happens if that person gets sick, goes on vacation, gets tired, just doesn't feel like it that day, right? So I've been like, hey, we need to bring in as much revenue speaking as we do with brand partnerships or even some of my merch, because I also had merch in that moment. So I was like, we got to find our products, digital products. These are all things that easily translate my creativity and my thoughts into a PDF guide, the Book Academy, I was launching the Book Academy or trying to launch the Book Academy because I know that's where a lot of my deep impact is in helping other really successful people write really successful books. So I had a team of 6 full-time salaried benefits. 2022, at the end of 2022, I did a big strategy day where I brought my whole team and I was like, let's chart out 2023. Let's make sure we can make the goal and remove me from being so essential to our revenue and business development. So we had a plan. We created by quarter and everything. I was feeling really good about it.
You had a great day. You had one of those awesome days with people and you're like, yes, we got this.
We got this. Let's go. And at that point too, I'd also brought on an HR consultant, Sally Thornton. So Sally came in and was observing my team. We already started firing people because Sally was like, that person has to go. That person has to go. That person has to go. So by the end of 2022, we had fired 3 people. We were down to a team of 4. And we knew we were going to replace them in the beginning of the year. So the year starts, we replaced those 3 that we fired. By February, the plan was already going awry. The plans were already going wayward. Why? Because the team started making epic mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Small mistakes, big mistakes. Anything that was assigned to them or that they had on their list, they did not finish executing. They could not go from ideation to execution smoothly. They would get stuck in the execution phase and be sending decks back to each other, back and forth. Like, let's say we were like, hey, we need more brand partnerships. All right, let's update my media kit. The update for my media kit took 4 weeks because the team kept on sending the deck back to each other. Oh, can you fix this? Oh, well, I fixed it, but can you fix this other one? Can you fix this other? Next thing I know, I'm like, wait, why have we not finished this? What is happening? So my company has a policy of second eyes. Second eyes is the idea that anything that is external facing, a newsletter, a caption, an email, whoever created it needs to have at least one other person. In fact, the ideal is just one other person, take a look at it, make sure it's good, ready to go, get it out the door.
How many pieces of content per week on average would you be putting out just in everything? I mean, a lot, right?
So we have my love letter, which is my weekly newsletter on culture, leadership, and growth. That goes out every Thursday or Friday. We like to post on my social platforms 3 times a week. Now, the other thing that was relevant around this time was Little Troublemaker Makes a Mess. My first children's book was coming out in May. So our number one, we had 3 priorities for the year or for the first half of the year. 1, make sure Little Troublemaker makes it on the New York Times bestselling list. Second piece of priority was audit all of our systems to make sure they're efficient and we're not wasting time or wasting energy. And then 3, generate other revenue streams, right? Our content is important for all of those things. Now, I still manage a lot of my content in spite of having a content coordinator, right? My ideas still run that. So I'll post something on Twitter off the cuff and they go, oh, okay, we can make this an Instagram post. I was the ideas bank. Their goal was to just execute, like their mission, not even goal. Their mission was to execute what we already set out. And they did not.
They did not. When did you know things were really in trouble?
March 2023. March is always, always, always a really busy month for me, for travel, for speaking, for conferences. I'm on the road. I'm gone probably a little bit more than half the month, like on the road. I had 3 or 4 speaking engagements, and there were big ones, like in front of like 3,000 people. And so in March, I almost missed 3 flights.
And just to put it into context, you missing a flight is like tens of thousands of dollars, really pissed off clients. Like, this is a big deal. This is not just
tens of thousands of dollars. Now, thankfully, I usually don't cut it too close, but I don't miss flights and I don't disappoint my clients. My admin team had put things in my calendar, wrong dates, or they will have the car picking me up 30 minutes late and then in Chicago traffic when I'm going to O'Hare Airport. Yeah. So that was 1. 2, as I'm checking in with my director of operations and being like, hey, have we gotten that deck out? Oh, no, we haven't gotten it. Deadlines were being missed left and right. It was like deadlines didn't even matter no more. At that point, I was expecting the deadline to be missed because they had not been made anyway. And then when I really was like, we're in trouble is where my CFO, so we have a 13-week cash flow document that I use that I look at every week. And according to that cash flow document, I had 3 months before the company was on $0. I was like, we are in trouble.
My heart just dropped.
Yes. Imagine me seeing 0 at the end of this cash flow document and me being like, okay, so help me understand how this is happening and what's going on. So I had to get into crisis mode.
Before we dig into crisis mode, one of the things that you've said on your podcast that I wrote down is, we don't talk enough about entrepreneurship as a source of trauma and triggers. Is money a trigger for you? What are the triggers that this journey showed you about yourself that maybe you didn't know, or maybe you did know?
Money is absolutely a trigger for me, 1. But 2, it messed with my trust issues. That's actually the biggest piece I think we don't talk about enough with leadership and how it can pick at our wounds. For me, I've always been somebody who knows she can depend on herself. Like, I trust me first. And even building a team is a trust exercise, right? You're hiring people and bringing them on and saying, I will pay you to execute my dreams. And in that process, I will trust that you will represent me in the way that I want to be represented. I will trust you in the moments I'm not watching with this thing that means so much to me. So building a team was already a trust exercise. Having a chief of staff who was in my inbox, mind you, that's a trust exercise. So as the team was given missions that they were not executing and they were not showing up in the way they should for each other, they were eroding my trust each and every day. The trust that was already a practice to build. So when I talked about entrepreneurship triggering our traumas, it absolutely triggers your trust traumas. If you're paying people well, you're treating people well, you're doing your part and holding up your end of the bargain by being clear on expectations, by treating people with the humanity they deserve, by making sure that in you trying to build a purpose-driven company, that you're also maintaining the humanity of the whole thing and building a culture of deep integrity. I felt like people were not showing me the same type of integrity, work, and passion, right? So it was absolutely messing with my trust issues where I was like, wait, I took my eyes off the ball for 3 minutes and you all punted the ball across the street. Now I gotta go run and get the ball. I was in therapy. I mean, everybody should be in if you're running your own company, honestly, if you're just a human being, you should be in therapy. But if you are running your own company, I need you to make sure it's a regular appointment.
Regular thing.
I need you to be in a regular appointment. Don't miss appointments. And because I was so tempted to be like, you know what? I just do it all myself.
Right.
Like I was like, fine, let me be the one. Let me do business development. Let me do content coordinating. I had a book that was about to come out in 2 months. My company is about to go bankrupt. My team is running in chaos. Meanwhile, I'm having to jump on a stage and kill, which I did every time and I always do. So nobody knew what was happening behind the scenes. Like I would be texting and scolding people 3 minutes before I took a stage and gave a 1-hour keynote. I'm not kidding you. This was happening where I would literally be putting my phone in my pocket as I'm walking on stage in front of thousands of people about to give a 1-hour TED Talk, okay? 1 hour. And I would get on that stage and I would kill it. Nobody would have any idea what was happening. I'd get off the stage, pick my phone back up. Have you fixed it?
Physically,
yeah.
How do you do that? How do you deal with anxiety and stress and like the swirl of your brain? And then literally, I'm going to kill.
I'm on.
Do you have a practice for that?
I do. So I would be getting mics. They're micing me and I'm texting people like, what's going on? Do you have this thing? And I'm like still engaging, right? Before I get on the stage, I say a very short prayer. Lord, help me say what I need to say and let it be heard in the way it needs to be heard. Help me do the best work I can. I would step on stage right after saying that. And literally for that hour, I would compartmentalize. Nothing else mattered but what I was doing. I would literally it did not matter what I was just talking about. My job here is to serve the people in this room. So I would literally just like put whatever it was in a box in my chest to revisit afterwards. So I would use some of that energy to give people the words they needed to hear, because a lot of my talks are also about the importance of showing up in integrity. So actually, I was also using some of the passion of, I don't see people doing it right now the way I want them to, so I need y'all to do it. Because when you do it, it changes a room, it changes the world, right? When you do and show up with courage, right? That's how innovation happens. And I was a living example of that. So physically, I would take that deep breath before I stepped on the stage. That deep breath left everything behind. And I said, I'll touch that later. I'm leaving it backstage here and I'll pick it up when I get off the stage.
Now, some people might say, but Luvvie, you hired these people.
Mm-hmm.
You manage these people.
Correct. This is also where the trust trigger comes back in, because then I stopped trusting my decisions. I stopped trusting my lens. So I started questioning myself. I internalized before I ever externalized anything. So I was also having moments where I was beating myself up like, man, what are you doing wrong? And I would tap in with my mentors and my friends and my fellow entrepreneurs, CEOs, and do temperature checks. Like, all right, let me explain the situation to you right now. Here's how I handled it. Should I have done this differently? And here's the thing. I also surround myself with people who tell me the truth. So I would check in with my entrepreneur friends and ask for temperature checks, knowing that they would tell me the truth. Knowing if I'm the drama, because I was like, am I the drama? Like, am I the one that's not doing what I should be doing? And each time they would look at it, they'll be like, no, objectively speaking, that person's wilding. Like, that person's out of pocket.
I'm Jessie Hempel, host of Hello Monday. In my 20s, I knew what I wanted from my career. But from where I am now, in the middle of my life, nothing feels as certain. Work's changing, we're changing, and there's no guidebook for how to make sense of any of it. So every Monday, I bring you conversations with people who are thinking deeply about work and where it fits into our lives. We talk about making career pivots, about purpose and how to discern it, about where happiness fits into the mix, and how to ask for more money. Come join us in the Hello Monday community. Let's figure out the future together. Listen to Hello Monday with Jessie Hempel wherever you get your podcasts.
Struggling to meet the increasing demands of your customers? With Agentforce and Salesforce Data Cloud, you can deploy AI agents that free up your team's time to focus more on building customer relationships and less on repetitive, low-value tasks. That's because Data Cloud brings all your customer data to Agentforce, no matter where it lives, resulting in agents that deeply understand your customer and act without assistance. This is what AI was meant to be. Get started at salesforce.com/data.
So the book comes out. It is a bestseller. You went into crisis mode.
Yes.
Is crisis mode a comfortable place for you?
No. Crisis mode is an anxious place for me because I don't like to operate in crisis or chaos. And I try to live my life in a way that mitigates that. So I'm very organized in general. Like, I'm very much grade type A Capricorn. We need spreadsheets. We need SOPs. I have an SOP library. We're not late on credit card payments. We are the most organized, planning people. We do not operate in chaos. So when it comes to us, it is anxiety producing. It was bad. But here's the funny part. Little Troublemaker came out that week in the middle of me doing press. I fired somebody. Literally, like, got off the Today Show stage.
Jeez.
I got off the Today Show stage, or was it Hoda and Jenna? I don't know, one of those. Or Tamara Hall. I don't know. I was in New York doing press and tour stuff all week. I fired somebody in the middle of my week. It was like, you have to go. So I was down to 2, and I fired my director of operations end of June. And now I was down to 1. It was just down to 1. And I said, well, the crumbling has happened. Now is the rebuild. I was very clear. I was like, I had to wipe the decks because I was learning all these lessons at once. And all the lessons pointed to, one, sometimes you have to crumble for the rebuild to happen. If you do not crumble, what makes you rebuild? And obviously there were certain things that I need to put in place that were not in place. And then the number 3, I feel like there was all sorts of spiritual lessons around surrender. Okay, because sometimes you can put all the things in place, you can do all the things you're supposed to do, and it still won't work. And in that moment, let it go, surrender. So all of that was happening, and I was very clear it was happening. So I was like, well, I tried everything in my power. I was pivoting. Me as a leader, I used all leadership skills I had. I'm a much better leader now also because I went through that. But just in general, I used every skill I had. Every form of empathy and compassion, every form of, performance review, and every form of the thing that people would tell us on LinkedIn to do. Everything. I tried everything. I tried it. It did not work. And I was like, okay, release, let it go.
Did you grieve?
I didn't have time.
Did you ever have a period where you had to just step out of the world? Because you're a public figure.
Yes. What was also happening at the same time, so when I fired everybody by end of June, in July, I launched the Book Academy. Now, why I did that 2 weeks after I fired everybody, one of the things that I told the team was one of our missions in the first half of the year was to launch the Book Academy, because I've been an author since 2016. And I basically learned all I learned by trial by fire, right?
4 New York Times bestsellers.
4. Like, when I did it with Little Troublemaker Makes a Mess, I happened to be at a conference of amazing, like, powerhouse Black women. I was in a session when I get a phone call from my editor. I step out the session, and my editor and my agent are like, Little Troublemaker Makes a Mess is a New York Times bestseller. And I start crying, sobbing. And some of my friends who were in the session came out and saw me and like hugged me and like basically like circled me around. And I started sobbing, not just because of the joy of doing that with this kid's book, that it was my first foray into that industry, right? But it was like that moment where I was like, everything was set up to make sure I failed at this. So it was like tears of release of like, I cannot believe I did it. Like, I dragged that book to the finish line. So my tears, and I posted on Instagram, I was like, man, sometimes God just gives you a win to remind you to keep going. And folks didn't even know what I was referring to, but I was referring to the fact that I had just faced bankruptcy. I had just fired my whole team. I have been in the most stressful time of my life. And this thing that I really wanted happened.
But we didn't know that.
Y'all had no clue, because I always make it look good. Because my standards of excellence, like my own standards for myself, is that, one, I would never let my clients down. I would not do shoddy work. Like, no matter what's happening, I will hold up my end of the bargain. And I did that. But in the midst of it, I wasn't sleeping. I know my cortisol levels was sky high. Like, I was so stressed out. I was irritable. I was like, I hate everybody and everything. I'm over it. To your point of when I grieved. So all of that is relevant because my friends were like, yo, you've been talking about this thing, this dream that you've had for a long time about helping other people do this. We need you to do it. And I was like, I'll do it some other time. They're like, no. Like, one of my friends literally sent me money while I was on the phone with her, because she was like, so when you launching the Book Academy? And I was like, I'm going to do it soon. I just got to. While on the phone with me, she sent $500 to me. And she said, go buy the URL, and you have to do it now because now you have my money. And I felt like I was on assignment to do this thing. Like, it gave me purpose. Like, so where I went to just go lay in bed for a little bit, it actually gave me purpose and energy. So I was like, okay. So me and my Lone Ranger, and then I hired like a part-time project manager. We launched Book Academy July 2023 without social media much, and just emails. And in 10 days, 270 people registered for it.
Oh my
270. 270 people registered for this thing. This sessions that would teach them how to write books and market from me. And people were like, we've been waiting for this. And in the moment of the crumbling, in the knowing I was beginning the rebuild, it was literally a divine offering where it felt like God was like, you have been through the trenches, okay? But I need you to understand, stay in purpose and stay in assignment, and I will reward you. It made me sleep for the first time better. It made me feel like, okay, in spite of all the madness, this is what it was for, because that old team could not execute what you just executed with 2 people. I was like, oh, understood. I was supposed to fire everybody. And I needed to be run through the ringer to fire them, because my toxic trait, one of my toxic traits, is that I give people too much grace because I want people to give me a lot of grace. But they could not be the team that walks with me in this new season. It had to unfold just as it did.
Looking at where you are now, how do you feel about your trust triggers?
So my moment of grief came 3 months later, by the way, after my finance team made a major mistake. And it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And I remember in that moment feeling like, dang it, who can I trust still? And that's when I took to my bed. I didn't get out of bed for a week. It was like all the ways in which I had been holding that at bay came crashing on my head when they actually broke my trust. When I got out of bed was the day that I had to do a Book Academy session, because I was like energized by the idea that, you know what, even while all this stuff is crumbling around me, at least there are 270 people that I need to serve who are feeling the impact of my work in real time. So I got out of bed. I gave that session. But in the crumbling, I started reading. I started sitting with myself. I started being like, okay, what are these lessons? And what is your trust thing that is happening here? Because I feel like trust was at the core of it. And I realized it was me not trusting God. Because if I had trusted God, I would have trusted God to make some of these decisions for me, or trusted my divine intuition, even in the midst of the crumbling. But I actually think that it was all about me relearning that it doesn't matter how much you trust yourself if you don't really trust the divine order and the divine design of things. That whole surrender thing that we all have a hard time doing, especially those of us who are type A control freaks.
Whew.
Man, listen.
If you're not a believer in God per se, does the lesson hold that we still have to surrender?
Yes, because here's the thing. You might have to surrender to the economy being crap. You might have to surrender to the fact that the season is not the right season for you to do that thing. You might have to surrender to the fact that your clients are sick of hearing from you. Like, there's so many ways. Businesses tank often, not because the person at the helm is not competent. All sorts of things get in the mix. But sometimes you have to sit back and go, but what caused it? Like, for me, in talking to other entrepreneurs about 2023, so many of them struggled. So many of us struggled.
It was a hard
Where
year.
people are like, yo, it was a hard year. The economy was going down. And frankly speaking, there's something happening, or maybe something happened because of COVID that also changed the way people work.
Yes.
I've gotten a lot of my friends struggle with teams also, where we're like, we don't know what we're doing wrong. We're not sure. It's out of our hands. But the idea of surrendering sometimes looks like the idea of pausing. What past me would have done was I would have been like, okay, I got to rebuild the team so we can keep running. Knowing that I need to surrender and just receive the slowdown that I was being given, I didn't attempt to hire anybody else. Sometimes you got to sit in the slowdown. Sometimes it's a gift to reset your nervous system.
The world looks different.
The world looks different. So I said, you know what, let me take my feet off the gas. Because maybe also the gift of this moment is that I have been running for 15 years. My career has been on high octane for a long time. I've been averaging 100,000 miles traveling every year for the last 10 years. My body was tired. There's also that piece.
Yes.
My body was physically like, hey, fam, this pace we've been going at for a decade, we're also really tired. So it was like all of that crashed on my head at the same time. So who am I not to honor that? If I was to ignore that, it would be totally to my detriment. So I took the moment to pause and I said, all right, my only focus is the Book Academy. I don't even have to do as much speaking as I was doing before. Let's put that on pause. So I'm not jumping on planes every 3 weeks, every 2 weeks. There was one day where I had 3 speaking engagements in 1 week in different cities.
Oh my God.
So I said 2024 is not just a rebuild of my company, it's a rebuild of self, of what's important, of the pace I've been on, of resetting my nervous system, of learning to trust myself again, learning to trust God again, learning to trust my instincts again. So this year, I think I've only traveled 4 times.
I want to ask if this experience has changed your relationship with fear.
That's a good question. I think so. It's so funny. Professional Troublemaker is the Fear Fighter Manual, and I wrote it 4 years ago. And now I realize I wrote it really for me because I dedicated a whole book to talking about how to move in spite of being afraid. And oftentimes, we think about worst case scenarios. I was presented with a few worst case scenarios last year. I think it's taught me that beyond the fear of what could happen, which is a whole bunch of anxiety, which is a bunch of traumas and triggers, I think our fears and that anxiety, it can have a good point to it, it keeps you prepared. But when it actually happens, the prep that you thought you had,
Nope.
it's not that relevant.
Nope.
It's not that relevant. It doesn't make you less stressed. The bracing for impact that you were doing didn't really help when the actual moment was presented to you. So that lets me know a lot of our fears and anxieties are pointless. Not because they can't happen, but the time that we spend preparing for the disaster doesn't really prepare you for the disaster.
I want to lift that up. I had a bad end to the business that I sold as well 3 years ago. And if you had told me that I was going to have that end, I would have hid under my bed for 4 weeks and thought, you can't recover from this. You can't handle this. But you handle it. And at the end of the day, it was just business. I thought it was my reputation. I thought it was my life's work. I thought it was my financial well-being. I thought it was my family's future. I thought it was everything that I thought I stood for.
Yeah.
But it wasn't.
Ultimately, who you are stands up beyond it, right? So even as the business for you ended the way you have not anticipated and was kind of a nightmare scenario for you, your name still stood and you can handle it, right? So I think to your point, it also taught me that even if we're afraid, even if we're anxious, even if we're doubtful, even if we have no clue how this is going to go, we are capable of making it to the other side. And I promise you, usually that crumbling is a warning sign that however it was operating before was not working. It wasn't working. So it's either a slow burn or a fast burn. And I'm actually thankful for the fast burn. I'm thankful for the fast burn. That did not go longer than 6 months. Our fears are acting like they're preparing us for this. We'll spend time being worried in advance of the thing.
To inoculate us against the thing, we think.
Correct, but it doesn't inoculate you. It's what Brene Brown calls foreboding joy. When something is going well, we're afraid of when the shoe will drop. And then when it's not going well, we're like, see, this is why I was afraid. So in either moment, you're not even reveling in what you have. How I look back at all of it and how I thank my fears is now I know my fears are telling me I have nothing to fear. Because if you've been faced with the worst case scenario and still made it to the other side, that means you can do it again if it was to happen. And here's the thing, even if my company did go bankrupt, that's a data point. That's a data point, right? That will teach me that, all right, the next time I need to do it different. So I think what we often think to be our failures and our fears confirming those failures are massive lessons and transformations that need to happen. That experience, 2023, transformed me in ways I'm still processing because it taught me so much about who I am. It taught me so much about how I can still stay in integrity in spite of what's happening around me. And then it also taught me that we're all in a collective experience. And in me sharing it, where a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, you've been real vulnerable. And I'm like, what is vulnerability if not truth that's courageous?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Hard truths. I'm not giving people surface truths, and why my podcast has been hitting people in such ways that I'm so thankful for. I think the gift of last year, of my struggles last year, is now that other people feel like they're okay. They'll see it through, and that their experience is not singular. They're not incompetent. They're not unworthy of whatever it is that they have. That even those of us who look like we have it together, even those of us who look like it, we still have these struggles because we're all human.
That's right.
So I'm just thankful for this platform and other people who've been vulnerable about their 2023. So if I can be the domino by being like, 2023 was trash, and now we can all really talk about it for real, then you know what? I've already done well. I'm very proud. I really am very proud about this podcast. And I think this year, if somebody was to ask me, what's the best thing you've done this year? Hands out, I would be like the Professional Troublemaker podcast. Like, I have been sitting in my house, writing.
Mm-hmm.
I have been talking, and this has been cathartic for me too. But in 2024, instead of running around and getting on stages, this is the year for me to sit and storytell. And that's what I've been doing.
That's it for today's show. Our show is produced and edited by Mary Dew. Our assistant producer and sound engineer is Nick Krinko. Many thanks to the LinkedIn Presents family, to all of our guests for sharing their stories, and to our advertisers who bring you the show. If you love The Anxious Achiever, tell your friends. Subscribe, leave a review, follow us. You can also tweet me at Morra AM or find me on LinkedIn, where you can follow me, message me, or subscribe to my newsletter for more from the Anxious Achiever world. Thanks for listening.